just think, how dare you spend that time getting to enjoy their football, celebrating when they score or do what you want them to do, but before they kick a ball, you have the audacity to boo them for standing up for what they believe in.
My name is Nik Nagarkar and you are locked into Culture TV. For the culture, by the culture. Let's go.
Niamh, thank you so much for coming down.
I'm glad to be here.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank
Boiling,
you.
isn't it?
Too hot, too much.
So what we were really impressed about you was we found your channel and we came across it, and what we thought was really cool is that football's our national sport essentially, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't know what your perspective on this is, but from my perspective, I feel like there's just not quite enough female representation.
I agree.
For the sport. And then we stumbled across your channel and it was going off. What was kind of the inspiration behind and getting that going?
For myself, really, it was the lack of the inspiration that got me into it in the first place. You know, throughout high school, the family that I talked football about, there were no girls there, no family members that were female. It was always talking to my granddad, my dad, or my mates at high school. And it was more just me. When I first started making content, I was a bit oblivious to the fact that I was a girl talking about football, because I didn't really, that didn't come to my mind that I'm a girl talking about it. But then sort of as I started to make videos, and the more and more you see online sexism in football is prevalent, and then the more I saw that, the more it pushed me really, because you have the attitude of, no, I will talk about football if I want to.
And how long have you had the channel going for now?
Since my first video was at the Euro 2016.
Wow, okay, so 4 years.
5 now.
Oh god, it's 2021. Yeah. Maths is not good. So did you play sport did you play football as a child? Or
I played it religiously all the way through high school. I was playing, I had a small time where I played with Rochdale as well. And then just as I got to sort of my A-levels, whereas if you're a lad, and there's always a team at the weekend you can play for, whereas it wasn't that accessible where I grew up. So I just sort of stopped it, but I play five-a-side with my mates every week though.
Have you noticed that in America, football, or soccer as they call it over there, it's a lot more geared towards females, certainly from like a high school level or whatnot. I think that's kind of strange that the Americans have taken to it in terms of like a female-led sport more so than in the UK or in the rest of Europe. I
feel like with that for America is, of course, with us, football is the sport, and every young lad growing up, it's more than likely that he wants to be a footballer if he wants to be any athlete. However, in America, you've got basketball, you've got the NFL, you've got hockey, all sorts of sports. And for women, it was an opportunity from a sort of make money from a commercial point of view to invest. It's where women's football across globally just hasn't really been invested in much until America started doing it. And by doing it first, they've completely monopolized the market, and the women in America are playing football, some of the money and sponsorship that they're earning from it as well. I think they were quite clever to take that on board and give women a sport really where they can be the main heroes.
Have you followed the men's sport, well, the men's game much in America, like the MLS?
Here and there, but I sort of focus more on European football myself. It's funny, isn't it? Because like it's almost like a career-ending place where people go at the end of their career. Like I remember Ibra said, because someone had asked him, they compared him to Carlos Vela at the time, and Carlos Vela was out there at his peak at a young age, and they'd scored like the same amount of goals. And Ibra at the time was well into his 30s now, late 30s, and they compared him, and he just said the difference is when I was Carlos Vela's age, I was scoring the goals all in Europe, winning, going through the Champions League and winning titles, and Carlos Vela's doing that in the MLS, so he's picked his level.
I think because the money out there is crazy, and what I don't understand is like in the MLS there's no promotion, there's no relegation. It's a bit like how the idea of the Super League that was set up. You buy your way in, and then it's essentially just a tournament to the end. But if you lose, there's no consequence, and really, if you win, there's not much to sort of win for either. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, my dad was out there. He went to watch a game, and he said it was, it wasn't bad. It was a nice surprise, but it did just feel almost like a middle class sport. It didn't really feel like, here you can see it's a working class sport.
Yeah.
Whereas over there, it just felt like there were spectators watching a game, wanting to see players who had been in Europe and come over to retire here, get the chance to see them and just watch football and not really support a team. Yeah,
because like here, people support a team. It's tribal. People support from the heart. Like they live and die for that particular team. Whereas we actually did a documentary on the MLS. It's kind of why I know a little bit about it. So we went to loads of these games out there, from like the top teams like the Seattle Sounders and LA Galaxy to like the small USL clubs and teams like that. And I think kind of what your dad's experience is kind of pretty much what I'd say was our experience in the sense that it's a bit pantomimey, you know, how they support the team.
Yeah.
Rather than, it doesn't really feel like it's coming from a place of passion.
No.
It's coming from a place of like, yeah, this is our team, we're going to support them, hurrah.
The stakes just aren't as high, are they, in football? Yeah. And I mean, as you say, if they've got of their passion, if they've got that in basketball, their basketball team or whatever, and that's just purely just to go and sort of watch a game of, I mean, if you call it soccer in itself, you just know it's going to be not expecting much.
So speaking of passion, so am I right in saying, did you go to the final?
I did, yeah.
What was that like?
It's so strange because it was so incredible, but I can't look back to the final now without just thinking of that second as the full time as it blew and Saka's penalty.
Yeah.
And it's weird because I'm half Italian as well, so
we divided loyalty?
I was never divided loyalty. I was always really, really happy every time Italy went through. Up until this Euros, I've watched every major tournament with my dad, and he was fully Italian, so I've always celebrated them. However, if England were ever to come up against Italy, which I just never even thought was going to happen, and it just did, then I was always going to support England. And so at that full-time whistle, it just didn't matter who it was we were playing in that moment. I was just gutted. But then sort of a few days later, after having a conversation with my dad about it, I sort of got over it. But it was just gutting, absolutely gutting.
What was the atmosphere like in there?
Incredible, absolutely incredible. It was, I mean, there's a few people around us that were in there for free. We'd seen them coming around as we were walking, and they were jumping up on a porta cabin, and that's how they got to the first level. And then every time they opened the disabled door to let someone in, you just saw like 500 15-year-olds just swarming, trying to get in. And in the end, they said about 2,000 got in for free.
Wow.
And a few of them were definitely around us. I thought, if you're in here now, you don't want people drawing attention to you, and they were there on their phones going, we're in for free, like that. But it was, the atmosphere was incredible, really loud.
What did you make of the aftermath from that game?
We came back, so we got on the tube, we were staying in London. And as we were walking past, we went to a quieter tube stop, where we nearly missed our train in the end, just purely because I just said to Sean, who I was with, we cannot go that way because it was kicking off, people were fighting, and it just turned really sour really quick. And you could clearly see the after effects of drugs, and obviously a loss and an excuse for people to be thuggish. And I would say that a lot of people let themselves down after the game. Also online, obviously, with everything that we've seen that Saka and Sancho and Rashford experienced afterwards. Do you think, as a football fan, I'm sure you've been to a lot of games or in your lifetime, do you think racism can ever be kicked out of football? I personally, I don't have that much optimism with it because, no matter...
That's hard to hear, so really you don't have much optimism with it?
No, because I think to myself, there are so many good people, and generally speaking, it's almost a bit like with sexism and an issue with that in sport. It's clearly a big issue within football. However, in all my time watching, I have never in the stands felt unsafe or felt like someone was being sexist towards me. And so this idea that you can go, no matter who you are, go to the football and be safe, I'm positive that is a thing, and that it is such a minority of racist people. But the attitudes of those people, it's just that optimism of, are they going to change those attitudes? Because if that is how they are, then, and we see with things that have been more prevalent, you know, with Brexit and with the recent couple of years, and I just feel like even more and more, it's just, this is how they are.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm not optimistic, is changing people. But I am optimistic that you will be able to go to a football match and feel safe.
Yeah. What I was really quite disappointed about was we've had the fallout from what happened to George Floyd over the past like 18 months. And I felt like there was maybe we're all misreading it, but I felt like there was an awakening happening in the UK. And with everyone taking the knee and then hearing all them boos all the time, and it's like, how at a game that is, and when you've got a team where half of the team are black or black or ethnic heritage, and this is your supporters.
I just think, how dare you spend that time getting to enjoy their football, celebrating when they score or do what you want them to do, but before they kick a ball, you have the audacity to boo them for standing up for what they believe in. And I can never get my head around it. And even with that, when they take the knee, you know, when the people around me, they will cheer and clap louder to overcrowd the boos, and that's always nice. But I feel like that's my point before, it's whether or not people will get louder, people like me, people around me who are trying to support people, that will happen more and more, but it does not stop that there are still people in there that are booing. Yeah. And their mentality is just not changing.
Yeah. Do you think Saka should have taken that last penalty?
Personally, no. I think that a 19-year-old never taken a senior penalty. I think I'd have been, if he'd taken a penalty within the 5, then if you're saying that Southgate's saying that in training he is one of the better penalty takers, then you have to understand that, and he's played a good part of the tournament. But that 5th penalty, which is the most important penalty of this nation's history in football, to put that on his shoulders is just...
On a 19-year-old shoulder, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of felt that as well. I think there's a maturity required to take on that level of pressure in any sport. But when the stakes are so high, there was 40 million people watching that game just in the UK. And we've got a 70 million population. That's nearly everyone watching it. Even
with, Sancho, Rashford and Saka, you know, you're never going to predict that all 3 are going to miss a penalty all in a row after each other. But even if it was Rashford taking that last penalty, he's had those 3 extra years. And in those 3 years, the amount of appearances he's played, he's scored important penalties. That one he took against PSG for United in the last minute, he rifled it home. This is a guy who knows he can take penalty kicks. He can... If this happens to him and he misses that penalty, Marcus Rashford's got that experience and maturity to know that will only make him a better player. And I think that's more difficult for a player like Bukayo Saka. But I hope he still does, and I think he will be able to learn from it.
Yeah, I think the level of training that he will have been through his entire life to get to that standard that he's at now, to be 19 years old and one of the major players for England, I think there'll be so much mental conditioning that he's already gone through that I'm sure that training will prevail, even as this situation moves forward. So I've seen that you actually went to see Southgate.
Yeah, it was this year. It was just before the Euros. It was supposed to be just after when the Euros were supposed to go ahead in 2020. But because of COVID, it was postponed, and I thought that was great because it was literally a couple of weeks before it kicked off. And it was incredible. He was just so humble, down to earth, and you just thought it was a local dog walker if you'd never met him. He was just so nice, and it was purely there just to hear our stories. I wasn't the only one there. There was young Philly was there, who was obviously battling mental health, and he was there to talk about that. Tyra, who is a young black girl in London who has got a massive involvement in sport, and Cameron, who is hoping to become the first British Asian player in the England senior team. And so it was all sort of different backgrounds and stories, and he just wanted to focus a bit more on sort of the grassroots level of football in that interaction.
Do you think it's crazy that we haven't had a British Asian player in the national team as yet?
Yeah, I think when I spoke to Cameron about it, because I wanted to, because when you hear that, it just does seem astounding, especially like, how many people, the population.
Like 10 million British Asians.
I feel when I spoke to Cameron, he said there's two things he thinks it's because, and they almost affect each other, and you don't know which one's the cause and effect. Is that growing up, if you are British Asian, you don't really want to get involved with football. You don't. But then at the same time, there's no representation there, and there's nobody that's like pushing you to think it's possible. And he's hoping to be that representation that makes it so they think that actually this is something that I can do, and just so that if they go to their local academy or wherever they go to the club, there's going to be other people that are British Asian, and they're not just going to be the only one. It
just takes that first person really though to fly the flag, doesn't it? And then it kind of opens up the belief system for everyone else. What if he can do it, then we can do it. So where is he up to on his journey with that? How old is he?
He's currently at Wolves. I think he's 18 or 19, so he's still young. And he's got a really good support system around him. And they're really sort of pushing and helping him. His family are really supportive as well. So they've got a lot of optimism that they can go far. That
he can do it. Has he played first team for Wolves yet?
He's not played first team yet. I think he's playing for the under 21s now. He's sort of just broken into that. And because we had a five-a-side game at St George's Park when we went there, and apparently there was like someone was breathing down to say, don't let him get involved too much because we need to keep him.
What position does he play?
Centre back.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Wow, so he could be our first British Asian English player.
Yeah.
Wow.
Hopefully so.
That's amazing. So what did you specifically speak to Southgate about?
So my conversation was about the opportunities for women in football, and not necessarily a career in it, just growing up having a football team to play for. I've struggled a lot in my life with mental health issues, and I know for sure that if I had a football team to play for every Saturday, even just my friends would pay £4 a week to be in a league, but it existed, the league, and they would sort travel for them. They have a ground for them to play at, and it doesn't matter if you're paying to play football or not. When you're in that match, it's competitive. And I know for 100% that if I'd had that, it would have helped me a lot. And football does give a lot of people purpose and something to look forward to. But growing up in a lot of areas, sort of northern working class towns, for example, it's that the funding is just minimal. So I was there to talk about sort of how I want that to improve.
And what was his thoughts on it?
Yeah, he agreed that it is a problem. He's got a daughter who is into netball, and football wasn't necessarily accessible for her. But he also was talking about sort of the different pop-up centres and stuff that they have coming through. However, I felt positive from the conversation, but I did still come away from it thinking more does still need to be done going forward.
There just needs to be funding in place, doesn't it? There needs to be, and then these like. So my nephew, he's played for he's played for like City, he's played for United, for the academy teams, and like those big teams, they'll pick you up, drop you, pick you up, drop you, and I get it, we get it. That's the way that thing works. But then his grassroots team that he plays for, where every Saturday, every Sunday, he's there. He'll play various other teams every single week, and there's a league, there's a system. There's referees in place, there's coaches, scouts come there, and there's just a whole infrastructure in place for these kids. And then like every week, it's like where they play in Failsworth. So there's like 1, 2, 3, 4 pitches. There's like 4 matches on each pitch in the morning. So that's 16 matches for young kids. How many kids is that? Like 150, 200 kids all getting to play football on a Saturday, and that's just one place. And I think if that same opportunity was provided to women, then I think like it would just create a lot more opportunity for the sport in terms of a women's league. but I think it would also create more interest and more fans and more money and more resources, because that's what it takes, isn't it?
I think people are pushing for it as well. I mean, you looked at the France World Cup, Women's World Cup in 2019. I was out there for a couple of games. They sold out every stadium.
Did they?
On BBC, they were getting 10 million plus views on games. The England-USA game broke records. And it's there. And the more you see that representation on your screens now, because when I was growing up, I won't lie, and I said this to Southgate, I wasn't thinking of any women footballers in terms of like when you're young and you pretend to be players or say I want to play like that. I'd always say Pirlo me. I played in the field and say Pirlo. There was never a woman because there was nowhere to watch it, no TV channel. For all
There's
I knew,
no female superstars.
No, you're right.
And I think that's part. There's no one looking at them and dreaming, is it? And I think that's
I think
like
it will come,
problem.
and I think it will come soon at the top because nations like America are funding it, and the rest of the world are following. I've noticed France, Germany, Italy putting more funding into their women's team. At the top, it exists more in England in the last few years as well, and I think names coming up now, Lucy Bronze in this country, Alex Morgan, American, some names are coming through, and more names will come through. And I just think as well, as you say, in some of these working class areas, like my mum works in a primary school, and the girls and boys in there, they are willing to graft. They will do their schoolwork and then they'll play football till all hours, and they'll do it, and just give them that opportunity, and not just the opportunity, but make it accessible for them. If it's a 1 hour drive to get to it, 2 hour drive to get to it, then they are going to struggle to get to training and the football matches. So just making it more frequent and more accessible for young girls.
And there's a lot more grounds available as well nowadays, because I think there's council orders where there have to be so many recreational facilities in X amount of square miles or whatever. So there is the ability to do it. There just needs to be infrastructure system, I think, and most importantly, a will from people in like the places above to...
Boris Johnson recently came out and said that he doesn't want a football pitch to be more than 15 minutes away from anybody. But I almost feel like that's not really the problem. There is football pitches within 15 minutes of most people. It's just that you have to pay quite a lot to get on that. It's most of these pitches for an hour is at least £100. So instead of creating more and more football pitches, try and make it more affordable for the people getting involved, because just getting them playing football instead of God knows what else they could be doing in that time when they're growing up is so important.
What did you think of Southgate's performance as a manager during this Euros?
I can't fault him at the moment in terms of...
Is that because you met him? And you feel a bit tight, isn't it?
Before I met him, I could fault everything. No, I think there are things that I have disagreed with, but when they've happened and they've got us results, I almost feel like I can understand it still. Like, for example, Phillips and Rice. Before the game kicked off, when we saw Phillips and Rice, that is something that in my head I would disagree with. But when I saw it in motion, I thought, I can understand why he's done it. Same with Saka playing as well against Germany. The penalties, that's the only thing where I cannot see it from his perspective. I can't see him bringing on Rashford and Sancho for that little time with jelly legs coming up for those penalties, when it is known that players are more likely to miss if they have those few seconds on the pitch, and then putting Saka at fifth. But in terms of throughout the tournament, game by game, I thought we set out very well.
I think the proof is in the pudding. End of the day, we got into the finals of the Euros. That's never happened, and it's the first final since 1966. And before that, we got in the semis in the World Cup. So his performance as a manager, he's outdone everybody else up certainly in the last 30, 40 odd years. So I think there is, like, stats don't lie, do they? He has actually made sort of those gains and those achievements. What is your prediction? Well, two things. Do you think he should stay on for World Cup 2022? And how far do you think we can go in that?
I think it's almost like you're a victim of your own success, because if he doesn't win the World Cup now in 2022, I will understand that they get rid of him now, because we've got to a semi-final, we've got to a final. The players we've got, a lot of our players, you can put arguments in for being top 5 in the world in most positions, or they'll be that way by the time that World Cup comes round. And you've got to question, if you can't win a World Cup with this group of players that got to the final this time round, you can learn from it, go out there and win that World Cup, then if there is a successor that they think can take them further, I know people have talked about Frank Lampard, Steven Gerrard as potential candidates, then you have got to think, really, has your time come up? And you can't afford to be sort of dining off previous success. You've got to keep it going to that standard. And if we don't win the World Cup, I will understand if they get rid of him and bring someone new.
I think we've got to keep the momentum going now. Like, we've had a semi-final, we've had a final. Let's see what World Cup 2022 brings. But if we don't win and we do a semis, I think anything less than a semis would be a failure.
Yeah, 100%.
It'd have to be a semis. But I think if we did a semis again, I think, yeah, he'd have to go. But if they brought in someone else who can keep that momentum going and we keep hitting top 4, top 3 or top 2 every single time there's a major tournament, I think it's just a matter of time before we just get it over the line. You've
got to remember though as well, we're favourites going into this. We were second favourites going into this Euros. Going into that World Cup, we could be favourites. It would not surprise me if they could turn around and say France favourites. There's multiple teams that could get it, but if they did turn around and say that England are the favourites, it wouldn't surprise you, because looking at their squad, they are more than capable of winning that World Cup. That is a nation that should be winning the World Cup, and so it's almost.
I feel like it's the British public that stop it, because none of us really quite believe. Do you know what I mean? Like, because it's never happened. Maybe it's like, I don't know. Like, we all get so gassed and like so excited for it, but I think there's a little part of us that thinks it's never quite going to happen this, and it never does quite happen. But no, I see what like we have always been like favourites or second favourites, and when I see them stats, I think, who's making this? Because who's deciding whether we're the favourites or not? Because I'm sure no one here thinks we are.
No.
Do you know what I mean?
I do wonder that. I think look at the teams that we've had in the last sort of 20, 30 years that haven't managed to go the way. And I just think there must be a curse in English football. There's no point putting us favourites, because it just doesn't look like it's ever going to happen for us. One way or another, something will go wrong. And the teams that we had, the sort of so-called England golden generations, we had in the 90s and the early noughties, they were able to achieve. I think what's changed since then, though, is the rivalry between players at club level just doesn't exist anymore. Whereas I remember Frank Lampard and Rio Ferdinand, they were together at West Ham, and when they left for Chelsea and United, they didn't speak to each other again until retirement, and they were really good friends. And you compare that now to the friendships you see across the Premier League. I saw Bruno Fernandes at the City Players' House a few months ago, and even with the England team as well, look at Declan Rice and Mason Mount. Like, the friendships that they've got, they are fighting for each other, and they have got that bond, whereas in the last sort of 20 years it wasn't that way. With players like Gerrard, Lampard, Scholes, it didn't exist. And so I think that as well is where we need to really make the most of this group of lads.
I heard that I think it was around the 2006 or I can't remember, 2010 World Cup or one, I can't remember exactly. It was around that time when you had Beckham, Gerrard, Scholes, and you had a huge sort of midfield and defence from United in the England team, and I heard that it was very divided as far as like the United players would all sort of base up together in the England camp. Then you'd have a couple of Chelsea players, the Liverpool players would all be, and it was very separate in how they would act socially. And that can never be good for a winning team. And
other nations just don't get it as well. They never used to understand what is going on here. Like, as I say, I'm half Italian, and I know firsthand that the rivalry in Italian football, I mean, it goes quite political as well. It's huge. And my family are all Napoli. And Napoli and any other team in Serie A, they can't stand them. But when Insigne from Napoli representing them, when he's there in that camp, he is best friends with Chiellini. They're all best friends. And they just can't, I don't think they could ever understand why English players used to really take their rivalry through to the national camp.
I think part of it is because we have got the #1 league in the world. The Premier League it's the league that everyone, no matter where you are in the world, it's the place you dream of playing. And what our clubs mean to people, I mean, Italy is kind of similar, I suppose, isn't it? It's like people are very passionate about football there, and in France. So I suppose, I get what you're saying, but maybe that is something to do with it, because they are Premier League players and the Premier League is so idolised, and the teams within it, that maybe that is what had caused those frictions in the past. But it is good to see that you can definitely see that them boundaries are getting smoothed out now with the current England team.
I question as well, I think, you know, when you say, how has that happened? Because it doesn't just happen out of nowhere. I feel like Southgate deserves a bit of respect for that as well. Because you look at previous managers, Fabio Capello, Sven-Göran Eriksson, Roy Hodgson, and you compare them to the sort of man that Gareth Southgate is. And in terms of a person who's looking after them as young lads, I can't think of anyone better as a candidate for that, which is why I would keep him for that World Cup 100%. And Fabio Capello, the stories that Terry and Carragher have got to say about him, like not like banning ketchup and you know, creating all sorts of strict rules and making it a hostile environment to be in, will obviously create those rivalries, whereas the environment that Southgate's created with England is just so much more diverse and welcoming, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for that.
I think 100% he's got to stick it out for the next World Cup. I think it'd be stupid to take him out now. Put someone brand new in who's unproven. Southgate's got the best track record of any England manager for the past God knows how long. He's got to get the chance at the World Cup. And if we don't win the World Cup in 2022, see you later. But if not, then
it's a ruthless sport, isn't it?
It's a ruthless sport. All sport is, but it has to be, doesn't it? Because it's competitive. And I think that's why like there was such an uproar against like the Super League, because it wasn't a competitive. It would have just destroyed it would have destroyed the Premier League. It would have destroyed like the French leagues and the German leagues, because all the top teams are going to be there and no one's going to care about.
I think here more than anywhere as well in Europe, you can go down quite a lot of divisions and you still got so many supporters. You know, Bolton were in League Two, which is the bottom division, and still we'd have had minimum 12,000 people in that stadium. There's a lot of supporters and big communities of football, and it would have damaged all of them. And that is something that is special about English football, is that local support for everywhere in the country, and it would have affected so many people.
It would have affected jobs as well, and it would have affected the ability to get into the league. Because I think even as a Division 2 player, you can still make a damn good living out of football. Like, it's still what, $5,000 a week, or it's 20 grand a month, it's 200 grand a year or something. So it's, I mean, and that for a Division 2 player who's playing in front of like 5,000-10,000 people a week, it's not the 70,000 you're getting in the Premier League, but still, it's a lot, and it adds a lot to the culture and the society, and I'm glad that got U-turned pretty.
I was outside Gig Lane a few times during the time when Bury were just liquidated, and you would be surprised at the amount of people that were there outside just in tears. And to a lot of supporters who don't understand Bury, might support a club far away or not really touch that level, do not realise just quite how important Bury Football Club is to a whole town of people. And the Super League is every single town affected by that. And so it would just never ever happen in this country, because the fans do have too much of a voice, because football means so much to them.
Was it Tottenham that bailed out on it first? Can't remember.
I think it was City bailed out on it, because they then said that they didn't actually know what they were getting into, and sort of played that card, which with them I was so shocked that they joined in the first place with Sheikh Mansour, because he's got everything right so far at City for Manchester and everything. I just was so shocked by that. And then they all just sort of crumbled.
Once they pulled out, everyone else was like, hang on a minute.
This isn't worth it.
If City aren't in there, City's like one of the richest clubs in the world. Neve, thank you so much. This has been brilliant.
I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you.